Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Now for the news. Hurricane Helene took an odd path which sowed death and destruction throughout the Southeast. First, I want to extend my heartfelt sympathy to those who lost family and friends to this terrible event, as well as the survivors who are facing a massive cleanup ahead. Having been through hurricanes and floods myself, I do know what it looks like, and when I say heartfelt sympathy, I'm not exaggerating. Latest death toll is an incredible 179 dead, with many still missing. The current economic loss is estimated in excess of $100 billion, and that'll probably be on the low end. Second, hopefully the governments at all levels will step up and get the type of help to people in need, and quickly. There's no time to play politics. Third, I'm concerned about the failure of our political system, regardless of party, to develop better infrastructure with regard to avoiding such disasters. Idiots wandering around complaining about climate change are not going to get this resolved. We face a serious issue in America. We have an out-of-control national debt of over $35 trillion and runaway taxes at all taxing levels. And despite the debt and the taxes, the infrastructure in America is in tatters. A friend of mine recently said, as an example, the streets in Nicaragua are better than the streets in Houston. We must tailor government to be more efficient. In the private sector, whole divisions are closed or sold when things are tough. Layoffs can be in the thousands as cost cutting is taken seriously. Most private sector employers have eliminated defined benefit pension plans. In contrast, governments at all levels continue to bloat out of control in size, salaries, and benefits. And at the same time, infrastructure and actual delivery of public services sinks into the buyer. This is time for a change. Tied to this incredible loss is Buncombe County, North Carolina, in the Appalachians. The popular art city of Asheville is the county seat. Last count was 57 dead in just that county, and more than half the deaths for the whole storm were reported in North Carolina. I call for a review of a list of things, including where houses were allowed to be built, what infrastructure was in place, and what warnings were given to the residents, as just some quick starting points. This should not happen in America. This sounds like a third world village. America kicks the can down the road again. Not sure if he has enough awareness to understand what he was doing, but old Joe Biden signed what is called a stopgap measure to keep the government open until mid-December. The lawmakers have had months, but then rushed through this at the last minute. The SAVE Act to safeguard our election system was not attached to the bill, which was promised by the GOP. This got the Dems off the hook, and the usual cowards at the GOP were responsible. Now, switching to the international scene, Israel has begun to assert itself in the Middle East in dealing with terrorist groups supported by Iran. Israel's been threatened from all sides and has finally begun a systematic response. The first step discussed last week was the exploding pagers and radios of the Hezbollah terrorist groups. Israel has also been making targeted raids on individuals heading up the terrorists. They've achieved unparalleled success in taking out the leaders of Hezbollah, especially with targeted attacks in Lebanon. The cowards and terrorists ruling Iran have demanded retribution. They then fired 181 missiles and rockets into Israel in one night. Fortunately, there were no Israeli deaths. Israel's promised to respond. Some are betting it will be attacks on Iran's nuclear weapons production locations or its refineries, or perhaps both. In the meantime, the Abraham Accords' 4th anniversary, trade continues to grow. This is based on a recent report in Newsmax by Meir Ben-Shabbat and David Aronson. Following the tragedies of October 7th, the question was whether the Middle East countries that had made peace with Israel under the Trump administration's Abraham Accords would continue to progress. Frankly, these accords were driven by economic desires, not because of the realization that we're all humans, just different. The news is pretty good. Of course, the sad part is that due to terrorism for the involved countries, moving goods through Israel is now safer than moving them through Lebanon, the Suez Canal, and the Red Sea. These countries need to keep that trade moving. They've got to keep their economies afloat also. The Newsmax report cites a new report from the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. In the first half of 2024, there was a 7% increase in trade between Israel and the UAE, a 709% increase in trade between Israel and Bahrain, a 64% increase in trade between Israel and Morocco, and a 53% increase in trade between Israel and Egypt. There was a footnote that while the possible agreement with Saudi Arabia has not directly moved forward, apparently Saudi Arabia is keeping it under consideration for when things settle down. Much coverage in the news has been Ukraine's Zelensky's campaign for support in the United States lately. They have created havoc in Russia by sending in drones and have captured an area inside Russia where they claim attacks have been launched against the war-torn country. However, realists caution that Russia is still ahead and unlikely to lose this war. After 2 years of war, Russia has captured the eastern Ukrainian town of Oldehar, which has been under intense attack. This is part of the terrorist Putin's goal of conquering all the Donbass region, which includes Donetsk and the Luhansk provinces. It now controls 80% of the overall area, with control of 98.5% of the Luhansk region and 60% of the Donetsk region. These are not good signs for Ukraine, folks. The VP debate is a big yawn. While I will comment more on the debate in my unscripted politics show with Kevin McDonald on the Brushwood Apple Network, it simply was irrelevant to the presidential election. J.D. Vance, as expected, was the better debater and even did a good job of dealing with another pair of highly partisan moderators. Walz lied his way through the evening, except his admission in response to a question about him lying. He also glossed over his cozy relationship with Red China. In fairness, Vance kept his eye on the ball about the fact that despite Harris's promises, she and Biden have been in there for nearly 4 years. Why has she not fixed all of the admitted problems by now? I do not feel that Vance hammered Walz enough on his failure to protect Minneapolis during the highly destructive riots. A Chinese nuke sub sinks in port. This is from a report in the Epoch Times, quoting the Pentagon and other sources. It's a serious subject, of course. China's newest nuke sub sank in its dock. I'm not sure if it was a loss or just needed to be pumped out. The report also indicated that this is a small sub that might be used to attack Taiwan, not a major ocean-going sub. This is relevant since the U.S. Navy has admitted that it is way behind China on increasing its fleet to match up with China. Hopefully, the U.S. Navy and its allies are at least ahead on technology. According to the report, as of 2022, China had 6 nuclear-powered ballistic missile subs, 6 nuclear-powered attack submarines, and 48 diesel-powered attack submarines. They're expected to add a greater number over the next 12 years. In my other reports and articles, I've advocated for development of a major fleet of nuclear attack subs for the United States to ensure control of the seas throughout the world, in addition to an aggressive approach to control space. To do so, we must continue advanced research, implement the death penalty for anyone spying on the development of these technologies, and of course, we need to provide appropriate funding. I have proposed that much of the federal government budget is wasted, and that includes the military. We need to have a lean, highly technologically advanced military. Nuke subs and military control of space are at the very top of that list. And to wrap up today, there's a smart idea for an older product. Ford has announced the support belt trademark, which it claims to, quote, is the first seatbelt accessory designed by a U.S. automaker to help mastectomy patients travel comfortably on their road to recovery. Ford researched, designed, and validated it, and it was developed with the thoughtful input of patients, doctors, engineers, designers, and other experts, close quote. Some of the attributes include simple Velcro fastening system, comfortable foam core, recycled soft suede-like surface material, and performance-tested leather trim. This is free, and there's a limit of 1 per customer. Pay shipping only. It is only approved for use for the shoulder part of the seatbelt for Ford and Lincoln cars. They're offering to licensing it to other manufacturers. Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. And when you hear this guest story, I know you're going to agree with me. Saving America welcomes Mandy Gunasekara. She's a veteran environmentalist, attorney, energy strategist, and communicator. She was chief of staff at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency during the Trump administration. She was involved in one of the more controversial acts of the Trump administration. She was the architect of withdrawing the U.S. from the flawed Paris Accord. And we're going to ask her about that. Currently, she's a visiting fellow at Heritage Society, also called the Heritage Foundation, a principal at Section 7 Strategies, co-founder of Satoshi Accent Fund, and a media commentator for Fox, Fox Business, and Newsmax. Her first book, Y'all Fired, A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp, has just hit the shelves. She lives with her husband and 2 children in Oxford, Mississippi. We welcome Mandy Gunasekara for her first appearance on Saving America.
Well, David, thank you so much for the introduction, and it is wonderful to be with you today.
Well, thank you so much. As you know, we ask our guests 3 questions. So reaching back into your recent past, explain to our audience what the Paris Accord was about and why it was important to extract the United States from it.
Well, it was a really big deal because it sent not only a message to the world that President Trump was going to shift his focus and put the interests of the United States first, he also made clear to the voters that the days of promising one thing on the campaign trail and then doing something different when you get to Washington, D.C. were over. And really getting out of the Paris Climate Accord was a key part of this. Recall, during the Obama administration, all of the UN delegates and the climate conference attendees, they dealt with an administration that would apologize for American excellence. President Trump made clear that that day was over, and withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord was a key part of that. There were obviously economic benefits, job benefits, but also American sovereignty benefits, because we knew what the left was going to do, and we've seen it on full display during the Biden administration, that they would try, nonprofits would try to take the Paris Climate Accord to U.S. court systems and use it as an argument to justify regulatory actions that were otherwise unjustifiable. So it really sent a strong signal. American interests were going to be first. And I'll tell you this, David, I briefed the president a number of times on getting out of the Paris Climate Accord. And the craziest thing was that there were a fair amount of people that worked for President Trump during the early days of the Trump administration that wanted us to stay in. So there was the stay in crowd and there was the get out crowd. But every time, and what ultimately it came down to, I briefed him on the Paris Climate Accord, he would turn to me and ask me a question. What is this going to do for the US worker? He made very clear that he wanted the United States to only be a part of agreements where it was a good agreement, number one, and number two, it was going to boost the outlook and opportunity of the American worker and the American business. The Paris Climate Accord is the extreme opposite. Also, it undermines environmental progress, something we've done very well in this country. So getting out was hugely important and a monumental event during those first few months of the Trump administration.
And one footnote to this, I seem to recall, again, it's been a few years now, that it put Red China in a different category than the United States. So we would be subjected to extreme standards, and they basically got a free pass, even though they're the number 2 economy in the world. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. All the hardship fell on the United States, while China, Russia, and India got an absolute free pass, and they are the worst offenders when it comes to any form of pollution.
Absolutely. Fascinating. So our number 2 question, your new book has quite a title. I'll say it one more time. Y'all Fired, A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. So what's this book about? I think I've got an idea.
Well, it's mostly in the title, Y'all Fired, plural, when applied appropriately. But it really is, there's 3 main parts. The first part is my anecdotal experience with the deep state. And this includes things you wouldn't believe, putting me up in a sex hotel away from an official delegation meeting when I had gone to Germany to negotiate on behalf of President Trump and U.S. interests. Anonymous tips turning into frivolous investigations. It doesn't matter whether there was merit or not. What it resulted in was tens of thousands of dollars in legal bills and a lot of wasted time, energy, and resources. So it's an anecdotal snapshot of my experience with the deep state at an agency that I would characterize as ground zero for activists that not only don't listen to the President Trump and try to undermine his policy direction, but will go out of their way to demean, degrade, and demoralize any of the political appointees that are doing the work for him. And so that's the first section. The second section is really a historical review of how did we get to this position where we are today, where the deep state truly is unaccountable and out of control. So it's a historical look going back to the late 1800s and really the shift of the states leading the charge versus this growing capital district and affiliated industries. And I say it really goes back to the passage of the 16th Amendment, which was establishment of income tax, and the 17th Amendment, which was how we elect our senators. It really changed some fundamental aspects of our constitutional republic that opened up the gates for the FDR New Deal Constitution to come in and then shift the focus of the citizens to looking to the government to solve their problems instead of figuring it out for themselves. So those changes, that platform, and then the establishment of agency deference. Up until recently, we got to check on that. But up until recently, that has really allowed the proliferation of the deep state to where today there's around 2.9 million unaccounted bureaucrats that are responsible individually for implementing the laws of the lands. I'm sure the founders just hearing me say that are rolling in their grave. That's not the way it's supposed to be in our constitutional republic. So that leads me to the last section, the third section, which is, well, what do we do about it? And so I lay out there's policy strategy, there's personnel strategy, and then there's the big picture commitment that we as a conservative group have to take this on, not just thinking about the next conservative administration, but very long term, similar to the way the conservative movement retook the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And by the way, for our audience, I have a business law 101 out talking about the demise of the Chevron doctrine, which is what we referenced a few minutes ago. That meant if a bureaucrat said something, you had to go through the whole bureaucratic process before you could even go to court. And then when you went to court, the federal courts would say, oh, Well, the federal agency said this. Well, clearly they must be the experts. And that was a judge-created doctrine. And I'm so glad that our U.S. Supreme Court, with 3 recent nominees, has helped to restore a little balance in Washington. Not a lot. And a third question is tied in with our second question, which is, we've talked about the deep state a lot, but that's the entrenched bureaucracy in DC. And as I pointed out in a different recording recently, overwhelmingly members of the Democratic Party. I mean, openly members give money to the party and so forth. How do we break that? What are the solutions that you suggest in your book? You highlight the problems. What few solutions can you suggest in our limited time here?
Yeah, so I would say there's structural suggestions and then there's technical suggestions. The structural really start with the budget. Day one, we can't just rubber stamp the budget from last year, and this will require some working with Congress and some courage in Congress. But if we win this next election cycle in the ways that we possibly could and bring in some courageous members of Congress to do their job and work with the president, we can very quickly limit the scope of the federal government. I would suggest a day one executive order getting all agencies to submit budgets that cut 30 to 40% and then incentivize additional cuts. So step one is structural, and it's the budget. Step two is including the elimination of offices and full-time employees that do not fit within tangible fulfillment of the agency's mission. At EPA, it's clear, protecting public health and the environment. But I could tell you, David, today there are so many offices that have nothing to do with that, but continue to be a drain on taxpayer resources. And whoever's coming in has the ability to reshape, redraw, and redistribute the resources, the appropriated resources within the agency. And so that is going to be a very important exercise. Also, moving some agencies out of DC. The more we can get bureaucrats or people with a regulatory responsibility closer to the people and entities that they actually impact, the shorter that line of accountability will be and the better the outcomes. So those are a couple of the structural changes. The technical changes, these are things you've likely heard of, but it includes something like Schedule F. I was the chief of staff at EPA when Schedule F was rolled out towards the tail end of the first Trump administration. There's so much potential there, and we really didn't get a chance to implement it for a variety of reasons. We were dealing with COVID, we were dealing with the election, and then the election went the opposite way that we ultimately wanted it to go. But Schedule F is a really important tool. There's also ways to get rid of non-merit-based considerations for hiring, getting rid of the DEI requirements in the federal hiring process, as well as the way that federal agencies award contracts and grants, because that creates a whole other subsidiary industry that we know is in Washington, D.C. And one of the other things I talk a lot about, and I put this in the technical category, but this is breaking the rule of progressivism in Washington, D.C. and the role of government unions. You mentioned this just a second ago, but so your listeners, it's very clear. 96% of all political activity from government unions at the federal, state, and local level go to support Democrat political causes and candidates. That is absolutely backwards. And so we've got to be willing to break apart these unions, ultimately get rid of them. The notion of a public sector union flies in the face of what that should really be about. And it's also inoculated bureaucrats working in Washington, D.C. that do little more than take a taxpayer-funded check home with them, and they don't actually contribute to the betterment of our government or fulfillment of important agency missions. So that's it in a nutshell. I get into a lot more detail, but that's the general take on proposed solutions to this problem. The last thing I'll say is who's going to implement the plan. And this is where personnel on the front end really comes into play, making sure that when we have a chance to have our conservative political appointees make key decisions, that they're walking in with the appropriate training and connections with the people who are going to be working in the same direction as them. Training so they know what tools they have to deal with personnel issues, how the regulatory process works, how to get their badge, some fundamental things, but then some bigger picture things that will make our team of the conservative reset crew super effective from day one.
Mandy Gunasekera, I love your game plan, and I've pitched some of the same things, and it sounds like we're on the same page. How can our audience get more information about you and your new book?
Yeah, so you can purchase my book. There's additional information. It's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can also check out more. I've got a website, mandy.ms, or you can follow me on X at MississippiMG.
Fantastic.
Consortium News sues NewGuard and the U.S. government. So an outlet named Consortium News has sued not only the questionable verification source NewsGuard, but also the U.S. government over censorship issues. Here's what is alleged by Consortium News. At issue is that NewsGuard tagged all 20,000 pieces of content, including videos, published by Consortium News since 1995. Folks, that's a long way back. And labeling it as disinformation and false content, despite taking issue with just 6 articles, but no videos during that time, according to the publisher. Obviously, this raises serious issues of credibility for an operation that is supposed to be bestowing credibility. What source does NewsGuard like? Now, let's say, well, the New York Times. That's a loser from the get-go. So I have to take some big points away from these clowns at NewsGuard. They also mix in the Wall Street Journal, which I do consider a fairly legitimate source, at least for business and general news. I'm not the biggest fan of Fox News these days, but generally it's far better than most of the slopstream media reporting. Of course, NewsGuard doesn't like Fox News either. Why are the feds getting sued? According to the lawsuit, the Pentagon, that's right, folks, the Department of Defense that's running out of guns and ammo, in September 2021 awarded NewsGuard a $750,000 contract for its Misinformation Fingerprints Project, a catalog of known hoaxes, falsehoods, misinformation narratives that are spreading online. The lawsuit by Consortium News justifiably argues that the plaintiff's First Amendment rights are being violated. I think that's pretty obvious. Now, NewsGuard can do whatever it wants to do, but if there's government action, that's what brings into play the First Amendment. The government is going after their First Amendment rights. This is just another one of my, as I say, I just can't make this up, folks. So don't let the slopstream media mislead you. NewsGuard is no better or worse than the media outlets it supposedly rates. At the same time, why would a government, trillions of dollars in the red, give these clowns a penny? America faces 2 existential threats. Internally, due to the destruction of the American experiment, which has run for about 250 years now, and it relies on a commitment to capitalism and freedom. And externally, due to the increasing danger from its enemies, we know who they are: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Existential is a word that's been overused over the last several decades. The key push has been the climate change hoax and its predecessor, global warming. This has unfortunately focused the USA and its allies on social trends and ignoring the real threat that we just mentioned. An issue that's been highlighted recently is the acquisition of land near US military bases by Chinese nationals who are part of the Z hierarchy in China. Biden's decision to allow a Chinese company, get this, to own 370 acres of land within 12 miles of Grand Forks Air Force Base in Grand Forks, North Dakota, is a real cause for alarm. This is part of a series of examples throughout the United States. To quote China expert Gordon Chang, in Beijing, they must be shaking their heads in disbelief at the inability of the US to protect some of its most sensitive communications. Folks, I have to say, I strongly agree with Mr. Chang, who appears to have a very good grasp of the situation between China and the United States. I consider him a true expert. According to Texas Scorecard, the Chinese Communist Party is aggressively pursuing America's agricultural infrastructure. The land, and in many cases, the food production and processing that is part of using that land is critical for the sustainability of the United States. In such a conflict that we might have in the future, say China makes a grab for Taiwan, such actors could shut down critical parts of the US economy while at the same time blocking communications at key US military installations. Folks, this is serious, serious business. Paired with this concern is a report that China is operating at least one police station in the US. China operates a reported 100 police stations around the world to spy on its civilians who are abroad. This gives them the resources to threaten and intimidate these expats. One aspect of this is known as Operation Fox Hunt. That's the CCP term. These CCP operators hunt down people they regard as fugitives and pressure them to return home. The time for America to take the second Cold War seriously is already well past. Hopefully, we have learned enough from World War I and World War II, where we famously were late to the table in both of them. We must prepare now before it is an even bigger crisis in America.
The International Longshoremen's Association goes on strike, affecting most of the major ports. This is 45,000 members. The group is called the International Longshoremen's Association, or ILA, and this will soon have an impact on consumers and industries throughout the United States. It involves about 36 ports, just about all the major ports. Some estimates are that half of all goods are passing through our ports. We saw this in Technicolor when COVID caused the ships to stop or to come in empty. The union spokesman have made very inflammatory comments about shutting down the ports, making sure everyone suffers, getting not just used wages on their already high salaries, but blocking the inevitable automation. I believe much of this is driven by the belief that the incompetent Biden-Harris administration will not evoke the Taft-Hartley's powers to order them back to work before Election Day, since the Biden administration is afraid of losing union votes, although I think some of that's already gone. Notice it is legal to replace striking workers. I call on the management of the docks to replace the strikers as they are legally able to do. They cannot agree to block automation, that is for sure. There's already an important demographic note here. America already does not have enough truck drivers and other skilled and semi-skilled workers. The ports will eventually shut down if they're not able to fully automate. The remaining jobs will be safer and higher tech. As I discussed above on the need to build better infrastructure, that must be the mantra, of course, all areas, and that includes the government and the private sector. I note that an innocent truck driver was merely picking up a load of trash at the Port of Baltimore and was injured when his windshield was smashed by striking dock workers there. I call for the police in Baltimore to swiftly arrest those who were involved and make sure that they get jail time to stop this mob violence. As we are finalizing this report, there was a sudden tentative deal to delay the strike until January 15th. Much of the news media is promoting this as a big-time settlement. This really just kicks the can down the road, which is something that we're very familiar with when we hear from Washington and the politicians. This was clearly a gimme to the Biden-Harris administration by the ILA. This strike would make the current administration look bad right on the eve of the election and might turn the tide in favor of Trump here in this tight election race. Word is that this tentative agreement will increase hourly wages by a ridiculous 62% over the life of the 6-year contract. This increases hourly wages from $39 an hour to $63 an hour. That's the base wage. Most of them make a great deal more than that due to overtime. So much for the Biden-Harris administration helping to control inflation. The big issue, automation, has not been dealt with. I suspect that this is a win-win for the union. They help Harris now hopefully get elected, but if she's not elected, this will be a major headache for Trump right as he resumes office. Note, January 15th and Inauguration Day, January 20th. Right, folks? So this is really a stage play designed to cause problems in the future, not a true deal. Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Sean Diddy Combs charged with racketeering and sex trafficking, among other things. This is a sad case from the standpoint that so much opportunity and early success may have been thrown away. Rapper turned businessman Sean John Combs, also known as Diddy and previously Puff Daddy and P. Diddy, sits in a jail cell in New York under federal custody. He's been denied bail twice so far. Reportedly, bail is being denied not due to flight risk, but due to concerns that he might attempt to intimidate potential witnesses. The federal indictment accuses Combs of involving female victims and male sex workers in illegal drugs and sexual performances referred to as freak-offs. These allegations include his participation and recording of these events, and sometimes these things would last for days. The indictment also claims that Combs coerced and abused women for years with the help of a network of associates and employees. Further, that he used blackmail and violence to keep his victims quiet. If convicted on all counts, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. His Wikipedia page describes his business success involving moving from Uptown Records to his own recording company, Bad Boy Records. He gained early success with performers like Notorious B.I.G., Mary J. Blige, and Usher. He won 3 Grammys out of 13 nominations and a list of other awards. Observers knew his arrest was likely in the cards after his mansions in Los Angeles and Miami were raided by authorities 6 months ago. This was related to investigations of sex trafficking. His former girlfriend, the performer Cassie, filed suit last year alleging very serious abuse by Combs. While that case was settled quickly, the house of cards was beginning to fall. Subsequently, there have now been additional lawsuits filed against him related to sexual abuse and similar claims. Due to his wealth, Combs does have top legal counsel who have promised to continue to fight to get him released on bail. His attorneys have also strongly proclaimed his innocence. Due to the fame of the accused, this story will likely have significant media coverage going forward. SCOTUS rules for the RNC by partially reinstating an Arizona voting law. The U.S. Supreme Court voted 5-4 to approve a request from the Republican National Committee. In a surprise, Justice Amy Coney Barrett voted with the 3 liberal justices against the RNC. The ruling temporarily reinstates part of an Arizona law that requires officials to reject state registration forms from voters who did not provide proof of citizenship. The ruling affects some 41,000 voters who used state registration forms but did not provide proof of citizenship. The provisions were previously blocked by a U.S. District Court judge who ruled that the provisions of the Arizona law violate federal law and entered an injunction. This was truly a partisan battle. The Arizona Democratic Party and the Democratic National Committee sued to strike down the law, contending that it discouraged certain groups from voting. In turn, Michael Whatley, chairman of the RNC, stating that the partial reinstatement was a seismic win in the fight to stop non-citizens from voting. And the Arizona Senate Republicans noted that the ruling affirmed that voters who register with the state must provide proof of citizenship to cast a ballot in our elections moving forward. So very interesting point counterpoint there. The RNC, however, had also asked SCOTUS to restore the Arizona law provisions that require voters, when registering to vote, to provide their state or county of birth, and that require counties to verify that voters on the rolls are citizens and purge the ones who are not. However, a majority of the justices did not rule in favor of this provision. The restoration is in effect pending the outcome of the case in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Given this narrow ruling and the fact that the Ninth Circuit does tend to lean liberal, the law may still not be enforced in the future. The issue of persons improperly registering to vote is a national concern. The RNC has made it an issue across the country. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled to permit, for now, abortions to be performed in Idaho when pregnant women are facing medical emergencies. The case involves an Idaho law that bans almost all abortions after 6 weeks unless needed to prevent a mother's death. The law threatens doctors who violate it with 2 to 5 years in prison and loss of their medical license. The federal government sued, claiming that the restriction did not clearly permit later abortions when the pregnant woman is in an emergency situation where an abortion might contribute to saving her life. The suit claims that the state law must yield to a 1986 federal law known as the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, EMTALA, when the two statutes conflict. The key difference is death of the mother under the Idaho law and the federal rule where it would only contribute to saving her life. So it doesn't have to be a clear death situation. SCOTUS ruled 6-3 in favor of releasing the hold, with 3 of the 6 conservatives siding with the 3 liberal justices. In an odd repeat of the accidental posting of the Dodd decision repealing Roe v. Wade, a draft of this SCOTUS decision was posted but then taken down. Any discussion of abortion, of course, is subject to great scrutiny, as it is an issue for both sides in the upcoming elections. The Supreme Court did not resolve the underlying legal dispute, opting instead to dismiss the case as it was improvidently granted. In a recent poll, over 80% of respondents would permit an abortion if necessary to protect the health of a pregnant patient facing a medical emergency. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. And I think after you hear this interview with John Gardner, you're going to agree with me that he's part of the interesting people. He's a self-taught entrepreneur after 2 decades of experience in American manufacturing. After traumatic injury as a teenager, he dropped out of high school and left Ohio to pursue his dreams in California. He slept in his car, ate canned food, and worked at restaurants. At the age of 25, he started a business out of his apartment based on cutting tools that his father had engineered. By overcoming adversity with determination and tenacity, he now sells his product to the U.S. Navy, NASA, Lockheed Martin, Ford Motor, the FAA, and thousands of other companies. His first book is Manufacture Local: How to Make America the Manufacturing Superpower of the World. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I think many other Americans. We welcome John Gardner for his first appearance on Saving America.
Thanks for having me on, Dr. Schein.
It is our pleasure. As you know, we ask our guests 3 questions, and so we'll get started. So many people drop out of high school, wander off to California and elsewhere. They often end up in misery or working at a fast food joint, and there's some songs along those lines, of course. How did you change that direction in your own life?
Well, I was working in restaurants, but I picked the highest end ones to work in, and I really just wanted independence. And I had left Ohio, Pittsburgh area to pursue acting because I was raised without a TV and a phone. And then I got hit by a car and had brain surgery, traumatic brain injury, and was in the hospital in a coma for a while. And when I woke up from the coma, I was able to watch movies. And I kind of grown up in the library a lot, but as I was in the hospital, I saw Dances with Wolves and Last of the Mohicans. And as a kid, I read a lot of frontier stories, and Going West was always the kind of dream, of the American manifest destiny type stuff. And so I got to see Superman for the first time. I was like, wow, I want to be in this industry and tell stories. And I, dropped out of school and went out to LA and was very fortunate to meet some good people and found I didn't really like the industry. I found it to be quite boring standing around on set. I loved the people, just didn't like the business of it. And so I didn't know what to do next. And here I am without I kind of remembered that my dad had started a business out of his garage when I was a kid, 9, 10, and 11. And I worked in the garage on a World War II era grinding machine. And I think it really was my dad's example of, hey, you can just start selling a product. As long as you have a product to sell, you can start something in your garage. And I think we all look at business now, not we all look at business, but I think we look at big institutions as I can't ever penetrate that, or I can't ever do that unless I like go up the corporate pathway. But my dad was a good example of just doing your own thing. He's an inventor by nature. So I think it was truly my dad's example of entrepreneurialism that planted the seed for me that made me even think that was possible. He shut that down, and he liked having 40 hours a week and a steady paycheck and health insurance. And he liked kind of the safety of that. He's more of an inventor. So he shut that down. I was mad at him as a kid because I was making good money working for him. But I believe that the answer is what really started me on that. What saved me was really my dad's example. And then also his ability to create products because of his engineering experience and make those products. And his example of watching him is really probably what, helped me be able to afford having a family in Southern California.
Just an amazing story. So your new book specifically addresses offshoring, as it is called. Instead of focusing on the positives, you describe some of the real downsides. Please share some of them with our audience.
Well, they're across the board. No nation has independence if it doesn't make its own products and it's reliant on its foreign adversaries for its basic goods. 90% of our medicine comes from overseas, and a lot of it is tainted and poisoning us. But we talk about the environmental aspect. You're shipping 7,000 miles on cargo ships, which burn raw crude oil. America has some of the cleanest environmental laws in the planet. So making stuff here is just cleaner for our country. But also national security. A significant portion of our goods for our defense industrial base are made overseas by our strategic adversaries. So that's just some of the common sense items. Some that people already talk about, but the things that I've learned or noticed from my experience in the industry that isn't talked about is the human capital, the know-how. Just because you can have a drawing of something and engineer it well does not mean you know the process is to make it. I recently automated a machine shop I have and have lights out manufacturing, meaning it runs overnight while nobody's there, unattended. Mm-hmm. And the hurdles to that are immense. You always learn stuff in any new process. This was kind of proven by, I think it was the Undersecretary of Defense was talking about the Navy stopped making torpedoes for 20 years, from 1996 to 2016. And it took them, I believe it took them 2 years just to figure out how to make them again, because it was all new equipment, all new machines, all new personnel. Nobody knew how to make them again, even though they had the drawing. And I think it really showed, World War II was fought and won in 4 years. And it took 2 years just to learn how to make torpedoes again. So also, World War II was fought and won. We supplied our allies with massive amounts of manufactured goods. The Soviet Union, we supplied. The UK, we supplied with Liberty ships going up in the Arctic Sea. That was all done because we had civil manufacturing might that could be turned to military manufacturing in time of need. Right now, we don't have civil manufacturing might that can be turned. We do. It's just not as strong as it should be when we're relying on our foreign adversaries. So I think national security is the no-brainer, but also the human capital and how much time it takes to learn how to do something again is the most untalked about thing that is lost when we offshore as much as we have.
Incredible. And so our third question is, okay, you've described the problem. I'm a true believer. I agree with what you're saying. What are some of the keys to getting manufacturing moving forward again in the United States? What do we need to do?
Well, we need to put American companies on a level playing field with foreign companies. And the number one way to do that historically, since the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, is tariffs have been in use since then in recorded history. And I have a chapter in my book that says tariff is not a four-letter word, because when I first heard tariff back in, I was like, oh, aren't those bad? We've just been brainwashed to think, have a knee-jerk reaction that they're bad. But America funded itself with tariffs for 140 years. Income tax did not exist. Sales tax did not exist until the 20s and 30s. America funded itself solely through tariffs for 140 years, and during that time, we were able to build up our industries behind this protective wall that even the playing field between our nation and other nations. And we bought too hard into the unilateral free trade theory, meaning if you tariff us at 200%, we're still only going to tariff you at an average of 3.4%, which is our average tariff rate right now, which doesn't make much sense to me. Another way tariffs help American manufacturers is to drive large volume jobs back, and so that companies can take advantage of the most beautiful thing in the world, even more beautiful than compounding interest, in my opinion, which is economy of scale. Any manufacturer knows that when you make 5 parts, it's much more expensive than if you make 5,000 parts per part. And the reason why is all the programming, all the tooling, all the machines, all the training that you have to do for 5 parts, you can then spread that cost out over 5,000 parts. But because of cheap labor, slave labor, lax environmental laws overseas, large lot jobs, large volume jobs tend to be pushed overseas. But if we bring those large volume lots here, then the price of American-made goods will go down because they have larger volume and can spread that cost out. Americans need to be put on the same playing field. You also hear a lot of economists say, oh, American manufacturing needs to be automated. It needs to have robotic cells. Well, no manufacturer invests in robotics or automation unless they have a large volume, because you keep things, robotics and automation and lights out manufacturing is for large volume jobs. So you only do make that investment if you have the volume up front, and tariffs help drive the volume back here. So I could go on about this for a long time, but I don't know how much more time we have. So, I think, one recent way that, is tangentially related to the problems American producers face is, I saw this thing about hazelnuts, organic hazelnuts. And this organic hazelnut American farmer was trying to get the organic certification. He found Turkish hazelnuts were being labeled organically, and he tracked down these companies overseas. They went to blind trusts. Nobody knew if these hazelnuts were actually organic. Now, 100% of American companies that claim organic are audited by the FDA. Only 2% of foreign companies that claim organic are audited by the FDA. And so they can claim it, and it's never proven, and they can undercut American pricing because they don't have to follow the same standards that American manufacturers or producers and agricultural producers, in this case, have to follow. And I think having fair trade and tariffs are the leveling field for that. So those are just some of the things that the big dynamics I think can really kick things off for American manufacturers.
John Gardner, love talking with you. And again, we want to mention your new book, Manufacture Local, How to Make America the Manufacturing Superpower of the World. And there it is. Oh, in large format. Okay. And great thoughts, and certainly something that is being talked about a lot. We had a lot of interruptions with COVID, and because a lot of things were made overseas where some factories were totally shut down.
Now the port strike, who knows what's going to happen with that?
Absolutely. So it looks like a lot of your topics are going to become, if they weren't already front of mind, are going to become even more front of mind over the next few weeks. So we're delighted to have you. And so tell our audience, how can they get more information about you and your book?
Well, you can find my book on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or bookshop.org. Just Google Manufacture Local, John Gardner, it'll come up. And my email is John, JOHNG, author, AUTHOR, at gmail.com. John G. Author at gmail.com. And thanks so much for having me on, Dr. Schein. It's such a pleasure meeting you and talking to you.
As we grow up, a common reference for success or failure is the letter grade. Whether we're in grammar school or college, we all want an A grade and certainly regard an F as a big failure. Here at Saving America, we scan the news for reports of celebrities, politicians, or others who just end up in the public eye So the A grades are awarded to people and organizations for great service to their communities, and the F grades, of course, are unfortunately more common, are awarded to those who need to do a lot better. A disease known as political correctness has swept through America. It has especially damaged education at all levels. The case of Christian McGee is a great example. He received a 3-day suspension for using the phrase illegal alien in asking his teacher a question at Central Davidson High School in Lexington, North Carolina. His family has helped him file a lawsuit in federal court accusing the school of violating his First Amendment rights. Christian's mother explained that this could have him viewed as a racist and might impede his chances for college. The school would not comment directly, but explained that this apparently involved their code of conduct. So the student handbook states, schools may place restrictions on a student's right to free speech when the speech is obscene, abusive, promoting illegal drug use, or is reasonably expected to cause a substantial disruption to the school day. And this is a quote according to the Carolina Journal. Now, how would using a correct term like illegal alien in any way violate the above code? That's beyond me, folks. But then again, I only have 4 earned academic degrees. What would I know relative to the geniuses running this high school? It is even more interesting in that this case is in North Carolina. I would be less surprised if it was in communist-occupied California or New York. Therefore, Saving America awards Christian McGee and his family a coveted Saving America A grade. The badge of dishonor today belongs to the ACLU, which used to stand for the American Civil Liberties Union. They fought for minorities in this country starting in the 1920s by helping Jewish and Black Americans achieve equality, a very worthwhile goal. They are now the anti-American, anti-civilization, and anti-liberty union. With an annual budget of $300 million, sadly, they stand for a force opposing the basic tenets of American civilization. They oppose the death penalty. However, the reality is that the death penalty is a deterrent to other monsters who kill hardworking, God-fearing Americans. Given some of the recent horrific cases involving illegals in this country, how can anyone argue they should not be executed? They've defended, that's the ACLU, unrestricted abortions. Most Americans support keeping abortions legal, but definitely do not support having them available in the 3rd trimester. In fact, most support prohibiting them after the 1st trimester, absent the safety of the mother and things like that. The trigger today for our F grade is that the ACLU has promised to sue to block the new state law in Louisiana that mandates that every public school in the state display the 10 Commandments. In their defense, Louisiana legislators cite a 2005 Supreme Court decision where the Supreme Court found that the Establishment Clause did not prevent the display of the 10 Commandments monument on the grounds of the Texas state capitol. I can kind of see how there's some parallels and some non-parallels there. Given the very neutral and basic nature of these commandments, in what universe would its terms be offensive to the vast, vast majority of Americans? So Saving America awards today's F grade to the ACLU after it having long outlived its usefulness and for standing for anti-American precepts. Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.